Hi, my name's Philip Bither. I'm the Curator for Performing Arts here at the Walker Arts Center, and I'm with Leslie Parker, who's a choreographer, dancer, artist across many disciplines, producer, and we just completed a 3-year project called Call to Remember, and a new dance theater performance work called Divination Tools, Imagine Home. And we are here in conversation 5 weeks after the premiere. How are you feeling? And we've got a little time to reflect on what I consider an incredibly successful and moving, powerful project. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I feel really good
Good.
about it.
Yeah.
You know, of course there are challenges, and it was a pretty intense experience around improvisation, only because of working with collaborators who aren't as inside of improvisation and their practice is the way that I am, but people who I have relationships with and who I really admire their perspectives that in their line of art, like visual artists,
Right.
you know, dance writers or just researchers, just the amount of conversations that I've had across different genres, art genres,
Yes.
and particularly Black artists, Black visual artists, storytellers, writers. And so improvisation is something that, from being a dancer, my point of view, is not necessarily the same as, say, a visual artist who does improvisation.
Yes.
So the intensity that I'm talking about has to do with how to come to a meeting of the minds in terms of coming into an improvisation practice that centers dance. And so there were times where it was really challenging for me because it's centering dance and because it is my vision, to be honest.
Right.
It was not always easy in terms of how do we balance a collaboration so that these artists, these brilliant artists that I'm working with, their voice is heard in the way that they understand improvisation just as much as mine. So there were times throughout the creative processes where I can remember talking with visual artists in the work and saying, I don't want a tug of war. They said, it's not, it's just, it's more of like a seesaw. I was like, okay.
I guess visual artists, the notion of improvisation is a little bit harder for people creating object-based visual culture.
I mean, certain aspects,
right?
Because when we're talking about dance and working with this particular piece, when it premiered at the Walker Arts Center, meant that the visual artists, to speak more precisely or specifically, aren't necessarily accustomed to the kind of timeline that we're under in order to produce or see something out of a creative process. But what I love about working with visual artists is that they respect the process so much. You know, creative process, like they really like are total storytellers to me in their own right, in the way that they develop maybe a kind of narrative in the way, the visual artists I work with, and how, and then seeing it manifested through their hands or through materials, right? Whereas my experience is so embodied, that it's just a different way of communicating. And I think that we did get there, and by the premiere, we had huge respect for one another on a whole nother level.
Are there certain strategies you have used over the years or that you perfected with this project to bring collaborators along, or, you know, around notions of improvisation or process in the way you work? I noticed that you have an incredible capacity to find the strengths in people and have them rise up by identifying what they're best at and empowering them to do their best work.
I mean, I wouldn't consider it a strategy.
Yeah.
I just like to get to know people.
Right.
You know, I like to create space where people are feeling like they can bring their whole selves into a relationship.
Right.
Or into a project or into a creative process, you know. And I feel like because I'm emotionally driven on some levels within my work and within my processes, for me, the humanity aspect of the work tends to be more of the driving force and the foundation So in recognizing that over time for me, that caring about humanity in the way that I do, in a very poetic sense, means that how do I connect with someone on an emotional level, which requires some vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
So with me being an incredible vulnerable person at times, I've learned in caring for myself and my own vulnerabilities how to be in communication with others through just a sense of empathy and care for people in their lives.
That was clear throughout the process. And I want to go back for a second to Black improvisation and dance. And you really foregrounded that from the start, that you made it clear to us and through the project that you were valuing Black dance improvisation in a very forward-thinking way. I was reading your great publication and conversations with Nia and Marlise Yerby. Someone referred to tuning the divine as a kind of relationship, as a way of thinking about Black improvisation and dance. Could you just talk about that?
Sure. I mean, Nia Love and Marlise Yerby are definitely two people that, in my practice over the years, who I've learned from and considered them mentors in different ways. And one of the ways that they've mentored me was not just only in a studio or in a classroom or around technique, but just spending time and having meals and like going shopping together, like just being people, doing daily activities, and just beginning to sense from each other the ways in which art is inspired or through the way that we live our daily lives. And I've known that way of being in myself pretty much all my life. And so I connected to them, to particular, and there's others. But those two in particular, when I recognized it in them, you know. And so I would say that there's a divinity to that on some levels. It's another way of thinking about divination. I think divination can mean a lot of things to different people. And the tools that we use can vary across the spectrum in so many ways. So for me, the tuning and the divining is a part of being in connection with people and how we are all, the interconnectedness of experiences among people and lived experiences among people in the way that we thrive or the way that we survive or the way that we hurt or heal or love. And the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that are told to us, the stories that we hold that gives us a sense of direction or non-direction. I think the divinity in that and tuning into that not only is something that is on a physical level, right, of like physical actual tools. It's also in the unseen, in the connection to the unseen, things that we are not as visible. And the Black lived experience has a history of dealing with the invisible in a kind of way that I can talk about at times, and sometimes it's not legible, and that's not easy to locate, and it's not always supposed to be located. But the art and the practice of art and the practice of an embodied practice allows us to be in conversation among people who have a lived experience, particularly a Black lived experience, that allows me to tune into them in a way that with a language that is not always understood by the ear, but understood in other ways, in the ways that we sense and our sensory levels, I want to say, or just the way that we are in space together. And so the tuning in, the channeling, and the divining has a lot to do with the sensitivities of just being in relationship.
You know, I was reading a book by Wendy Perrin about the Grand Union Collective, and called Accidental Anarchists, and she interviewed Diane McIntyre, who's a great pioneer of jazz and dance and using improvisation. But Diane mentioned, like back in the 70s, she purposely didn't use the word improvisation because she felt like people would go in thinking, oh, the dancers are just, her words, doodling around on stage.
Yeah.
You have really courageously or consciously put the word improvisation out there in a bold way. Did you fear at all that people might have that misconception of like, what?
I had questions.
Yeah.
I did think about it. There's a lot of thought about
Yeah.
the Black dance improvisation. But I also think that those questions are important.
Yeah.
The questions that I had, I'm like, do I have to have the answers
Right.
to claim this?
Yeah.
And I decided, no, I think it's an opportunity to be in conversation. But I will say what connects me to it, or what resonates for me, is that I claim a lot of parts of what makes me who I am, right?
Yeah.
Like, I claim being Black. I claim being Black African American. I claim that being in this country, growing up here, that I have European influences. I claim that those European influences from white people in my family or around the country, or the different ethnicities of whiteness, the political aspects of whiteness, have had an effect on me, and has made me a part of who I am to some degree, and that I can speak on that for ever.
Yes, right.
There's a lot to that, right? So I think when I talk about improvisation, I'm not looking at it from a lens of what people know of improvisation to be in the history of dance, although I recognize it as a part of dance. And it has been, I have been in different models of improvisation within white spaces, that some of it I've adopted.
Like contact improvisation or something like that, or?
I mean, now that's something I wouldn't say.
Yes, no, right.
I would not say contact improvisation, because touch to me is a part of part of life. Like, I'm a person who communicates through touch. So touch is something that I would do in dance, whether it was improvisation or not.
Right, yeah.
It's just a part of my practice, and sometimes I don't want to.
Right, yes, yeah, totally. And what I loved about the way when you would talk about improvisation, you also made a point that it isn't necessarily just about the stage. Like, it's an attitude toward life, and it's a way of acknowledging that we're all improvising, kind of, in some ways, but that honoring a sense of the improvisatory in
including
the way
jazz.
we exist. Yeah, right.
Including
did you
jazz.
say jazz? Sure, right.
So when I think of jazz, I still think that dance and music come from an African aesthetic, is that they're very much connected and integrated.
Yeah.
So when I think about improvisation, like I said, it's not just about the history of dance, it's also the history of music within Blackness. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's a way of saying that improvisation has existed within Black lives for a very long time.
Right.
And so has that word.
Yeah. And in fact, but I don't know if you feel this way, but in jazz, over the last 50, 60 years, or maybe forever, improvisation has been honored and celebrated as an essential part of what makes jazz, wonderful. Whereas in dance, it's been more of needing to, I think, make the case and prove to people how improvisation can be such a fine art form.
I agree. And for many years, I've always been an improviser.
Yeah.
And I didn't claim it in earlier parts of my dancing life because of those things.
Right.
But I wasn't looking at dance through the lens of my own Black lived experience when I was thinking that.
Yeah, right.
So this is what I'm saying, that because of living a number of years where I looked at improvisation within my own life, but not claiming it in dance because of these very political things, meant that there was an aspect of myself that wasn't really fully authentic. And so I didn't realize that I was not being fully who I am by thinking that I have to take technique and training and go in this other kind of pathway to validate myself as a dancer, and not think about improvisation as a form that involves technique, which it does.
Yes, right. Right. And when you started imagining Call to Remember as an expansive multi-year project, was that a changing point? Did you see it as an opportunity to honor and foreground Black dance improvisation in
Absolutely.
this way? Yeah, yeah. And was that new for your practice? I mean, in that stated forward.
It's new in stating it.
Yes,
but
right.
it's not new in my practice.
Right. No.
It's taken me a while to articulate it. And what I learned when I got the courage to just say to myself, no, this is what I really love. And I've been doing the training, I've been working with other people, I've been a dancer in other people's works, I've been a choreographer and a director of my own works, which I've always used improvisation as a tool.
Yeah.
But when I used it as a tool to create work, it was the space where I felt the most liberation. Not only for me, but even in my relationships with the people that I was working with. So then that's when I decided, I think this is the way I need to go. And the more I went in that direction, the more liberated in my practice and more generative I became.
Right.
And so then I just began to, the more I thought about it, the more I've been able to articulate it, and the more that it has just become more forward.
Have you heard from people? Because I think this is the case, that your project, Call to Remember, and this work we did here at the Walker has helped carve a path for other artists, dance artists,
so.
to like feel more comfortable in embracing their full selves. And
that was the point.
Yeah.
I mean, even with the Black Dance Improvisation Festival that we did in the Twin Cities.
And just for the record, when you mentioned Nia Love and Marlise Yerby, you really encouraged us and made happen. They're both visiting over the multi-year and teaching in our community.
Yes.
And then about a month before our project, our partners in town, who you really helped create the relationship with, sponsored Pangea World Theater and Pillsbury House Theater, sponsored a solo Black dance improvisation festival, which was wonderful. One night in one of the partner space and the other in another. Tell us about why you did that and what was the thinking on that.
Because I will bring another mentor into the picture and talk about Lori Carlos.
Absolutely. In fact, knowing we're talking for the history and archives of the Walker and the world, I really wanted you to talk about Lori because she's so important, but also been central to your thinking around this project.
Yes, because Call to Remember is rooted in the practices of Black people and Black lives. And for me, as a Black woman, what I embrace most about cultivating Call to Remember is ancestors. Mm-hmm. And I consider Lori Carlos a mentor and also an artist ancestor, an icon. Mm-hmm. And in my memories of Lori, she complicated at times and complex, like all relationships are, especially when you're dealing with mentor-mentee relationships. But what I hold dear to me is the way that she nurtured artists, and especially younger artists. Right. And it didn't look the same for everyone that she nurtured. No. It was very much nuanced according to who she was in relationship with, which I actually adored and admired about her, because it was so authentic in that way. It wasn't just a model of mentorship should be like this. It was Lori Carlos being Lori Carlos in conversation with these younger artists and mentoring them, whether it was a goal to do or not. You know, it was just the way she was. Yep. And because of that, in the way that it influenced me, in the way that it opened doors for me, I felt like it's only right that that's what I do in a way of carrying on what I've learned in Black cultures and the importance of naming the people that have paved ways before you and who have like coined a particular movement, or who, if no one else gives us credit, it's important that we give ourselves credit and that we recognize the heroes within our own culture, because if we had relied on other people to do that for us over the years and past years, even before my time, I don't know how much credit we would have actually gotten. Right. So the oral history, the importance of being able to say, Lori Carlos impacted me, and she is, for me, a forerunner who has laid the groundwork for the way that I think about Black improvisation. And you know, in the performing arts, time-based forms, it's so easy for once people, they've passed and no longer making work, for the world to forget about them. So
the fact that you're honoring Lori and her influence is so important, I think. And also in the early days, early 2020, when the partners all started thinking about working together, everyone realized everyone had their own, greater or lesser, but their own relationship with Lori Carlos in some way. And that, I think, started the partnership off with a level of trust and everyone remembering Lori's profound influence.
Yes.
Right,
and it was also very authentic to the practice of Call to Remember.
Right.
And it was a way to involve the partners
Yeah.
within the methodology that I would call it of CTR in a way that is, like I said, humane.
Right.
And accesses more of a person more holistically and authentically when we can think about relationship in a particular kind of way associated with their humanity.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit to, we talked before about your visual art collaborators, but one of the things that was a wonderful result, I think of the longer term that we had to work together on this project is your involvement with our Pelley department, public education and interpretation, and our visual art, side of things, and the installation that you helped make happen, which was a big part of how the project lived here at the Walker.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why that was important and then how you made it?
It's a pretty extensive process.
Yes. That's a big question.
It's a big question. So there's multiple ways I can enter into that. And I think I'll begin with the conversation I had with Amanda Hunt.
Right.
Around processional.
Wonderful new colleague here at the Walker and is head of the whole Pelley department. But,
what a joy
it
was to sit and have coffee with Amanda. And originally it was just about getting to know each other, knowing that another woman of color is in the building.
Yeah, and a real leader here at the Walker.
I'm like, I want to know her.
Yeah.
And so we just wanted to have coffee and just say, let's just talk and get to know each other.
Was that before even we thought about an installation? And, oh, that's great. Good. I don't even know if I knew that. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Totally.
I know Amanda said soon after she got here and mentioned the project, I want to have coffee with Leslie. So I'm glad that happened.
Oh my gosh, it was wonderful. And through that conversation, things developed, ideas started flowing. And I would say the installation part wasn't necessarily a new idea. It was a new idea for the Walker at that time.
Yes, because you did it kind of at Pillsbury
I did
House.
it at Pillsbury. The residency that I had there in late May of 2021 is, because it was a year after the murder of George Floyd, and it was during the same time frame. And it was also...
That was a year after your first early stage sort of version of Call to Remember.
Which was in February of 2020.
2020,
And also dealing with the pandemic, the COVID, we don't say the COVID. COVID-19. So then being at Pillsbury House Theater, it was another opportunity to think really experimental and out of the box because we weren't having audiences at the time.
Right.
And Pillsbury House Theater that's a really strong presence within the community of Powderhorn.
Definitely.
Where so much of what we're talking about in terms of George Floyd at the time and COVID was at a height in terms of the way that people of color were being affected.
Right.
So.
And Pillsbury House is just 8 blocks away or so.
3 blocks. 3 blocks away.
From 38th in Chicago.
Yeah, and it was still at that time where a lot of people gathered for healing just a year later. And then there was a lot of discussion around what do we do with this year? Because no one is forgetting and we don't want to forget, So the idea of the processional, really, that was the beginnings of it from being in residency at Pillsbury House during that year.
Yeah, because you did one there. And so a little, maybe more complicated at a place like the Walker, but
not really. Actually, it was more complicated here.
Oh, no, that's what I mean. It's more complicated here. That has all these different departments, and it can get it was quite an accomplishment.
It was a lot of voices. A lot of what is it that she's doing? We don't even really know what she's doing. We don't understand what she's doing. But Amanda and I, through the connection that we made, there was something there, like the invisible, the unseen, that we were
Right.
both able to tap into that flow, almost
Yeah.
like a divine tuning
Yes, right.
that put us in touch with one each other, or where we understood it.
Oh, that's great.
And I didn't have to explain so much to
Right.
Amanda. So what a fortunate blessing to have someone of Amanda's status.
Right. Yeah.
And I say that because I'm thinking about the institution of Walker Arts
Sure.
Center. Get it.
Right. Yeah. It was it really, and there too, I think, although we've in recent years been doing a lot of interdisciplinary, cross-departmental work together, it always takes time and is a bit of a struggle. But you helped carve a path, I think, for future projects that may want to have things outside of the theater and in other parts of the building. And
I hope
things.
so.
That wonderful processional also brought an energy to the start of the work on the Thursday night opening, but also on the Friday and Saturday with smaller, but you channeled a performance presence that seemed to draw from deep ancestry. Could you talk about who you
Yes.
kind of became in the performance that was so powerful
Yeah.
in that performance as part of the processional?
Sure. I mean, how can I articulate? I'll do my best. I will tell you the influences.
Right.
I'll start there.
The Orishas.
The Orishas.
Yeah.
The Orishas, and I have a relationship with the Orisha faith.
Yeah.
And so at the time, going back to Pillsbury House and dealing with the
Yeah.
pandemic, I was inspired by an Orisha named Babalu Aye.
Mm-hmm.
And Babalu Aye, I cannot do a great justice
Yeah.
giving that the time it takes to study
Right.
and to learn such an ancient practice.
Right.
And
West African?
West
Yeah.
African practice coming from Nigeria and the Yoruba faith.
Right. Yes.
There's a lot to it,
Yeah.
and it's ancient. And
Right.
I can't even tell you how old it is right now. But what I will say is that Babalu Aye is a deity of the Orisha faith,
Right.
the pantheon,
Yeah.
that deals with pandemics and diseases and sicknesses and illnesses. However, being Leslie Parker, I did my research and talked with priestesses, particularly a priestess that I have a really close relationship to. I have two close relationships with two priestesses in different parts of the country, California and New York. But New York is more close.
Right.
And asked about permission to, so to speak. I don't, permission only because of how much I honor and respect the faith and want to not be disrespectful in any way.
Sure. Right.
So that's what I say, permission.
Right.
I'm saying this through a Black lived experience in conversation with a Black African
Right.
religion
Yeah.
from Africa
Right.
with people who've been practicing this religion and faith for all their lives.
Generations. Yeah. Right.
So in that kind of hierarchical sense
Right.
of within that religion, I asked permission. And she granted it. And I said that I am an experimental artist, so
Right.
I'm also going to experiment with this idea. So
Right.
that is what takes things on another journey, because there are not many spaces, maybe a few,
Yeah.
that I can name within my generation, thinking more experimentally of the Black experimental diaspora, that outside of it, outside of the Black experimental
Right.
diaspora,
Yeah.
where there is a general understanding of the Orisha faith to know when something's being experimented with.
Right. Right.
And how to articulate when you know, oh, I identify that as a West African deity
yeah.
from West African culture that addresses our ancestors, who in turn gives us the life of imagining a future. Right?
Right.
So there are spaces within the Black diaspora dealing with experimental movement
Right.
and themes and thought
Yeah.
that may be able to identify a lot easier with having an entry point with that kind of knowledge base.
Right.
Whereas outside of the Black African experimental diaspora,
Yeah.
I don't know many spaces that are open to being in conversation about it with in a way that decentralizes their whiteness to truly understand it and be in conversation with it,
Oh, interesting.
to be honest.
Right.
And so
Sure.
in this moment of the processional, in that sense, is another opportunity in the way that you're talking about, like, so to speak, dissolving of the walls within
Right.
the institution,
Yeah.
to be able to think about more
Right.
and to expand the capacity within an institution to think outside of what we traditionally think institutions can do,
Right.
and how we can do this cross collaboration between cultures
Yeah.
and be in conversation like a practice of decolonizing.
Right. Totally.
So when you talk about the embodiment of
Yeah.
this experimentation that I'm doing with Babaluaye and also with Egun, which is also considered ancestor, is there is an aspect that is about addressing the pandemics that we are dealing with right now and have been for quite some time globally,
Right.
including the anti-colonial struggles that we find
Right.
that globally, as well as the diseases and sicknesses that we have dealt with globally, and that has also been different kinds throughout our lives. So being in that particular space and being open to drawing on these deities and also thinking about our ancestors was also a way of being very humble in having a conversation with what does it mean to in how we think about thriving with inside or outside of a particular space, within the body, outside of the body, within a time, outside of time, linear, non-linear, with the invisible, with the visible. What is the way in which we have this experience that could potentially be looked at as a circular experience that connects people through the lens of a Black perspective, historically and also presently, that allows us to heal from the inside out and outside in.
Wonderfully said. And I was going to ask you, in fact, this question. The work seems so of its time, like of this moment, because of the pandemic and the racial upheaval and reckoning that happened after the murder of George Floyd. But at the same token, it seemed timeless. And it reminded me of the great tagline that Art Ensemble of Chicago would always use: great Black music, ancient to the future. And that this is a work that seemed like it both was speaking to this exact moment and needed urgently, but also seemed to be drawing from the ancient and looking to the future.
Yes. I mean, Call to Remember is really a Afrofuturistic way of being.
Right.
Black people, from my experience and my lived experience, have always been Afrofuturistic. Always.
So that's not a new movement.
No.
Yeah, right. Yes, right. Yeah.
If you really study what's available to you to study in terms of music, dance, our intellectuals,
Right.
always futuristic,
Right.
And so we are continually doing this, moving forward in our work and practices as Black people, as far as I'm concerned, when I look at it from not only a political lens, but also a poetic lens, and what all I hold as an artist, right? And so Call to Remember may have people start from thinking in the past and historically. However, when you're doing that work, you're already imagining, right? You're already in a space of imagining something that has you contemplate and reflect the present. And I think for me, I will say that when you're in that type of reflection space, it immediately catapults you into the future. It can.
Right. Yeah. Well, the experience here within this institution, and when you talked about the work with Amanda and the installation, the processional, and the breaking down of walls, you came in. I think we both talked about, is this the right space, especially at a time where we wanted to make sure Black community members felt comfort and safety in experiencing your work here in this institution. And I think you really were wonderfully generous in meeting with Walker staff and meeting with leadership and having right on the stage in the middle of COVID, 20 Walker staff members visit your rehearsal and have a very open, vulnerable conversation in all directions, and then joining us for our all-staff meeting. Why was it important? You know, you think of other performing artists maybe going in for a week, performing at a place, moving on, but not really knowing anybody who works there or anything about the organization. Why was that connection point, those kinds of connections? Why did you take the time to do that?
Yeah, and I've also been able to go into a space, create a piece, perform it for a one-off, and then move on.
Right.
And nothing against that.
No.
And it's something I can do and may do again.
Sure.
I also recognize that Call to Remember in particular was something that struck me in such a way to talk about improvisation that I was also not always sure what the next thing looked like.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And so I felt led through this imagining that I was having in my own reflection of thinking about my ancestors and artist ancestors and being in the present.
Right.
Like how that information, how I was synthesizing and processing that information to move me forward. So I genuinely would take the moment to be in that space of reflection and not feel like I needed to force something to happen into the future, but allowing the process of being present in the moment through a process of reflection to allow me to say, what is it that is needed? What in this moment is needed? How can I participate in being a part of connecting this moment and energies and ideas and creative flow here because of what Walker Arts Center means to the local community.
Right.
Not national, but local. And I feel like it was an opportunity as being being locally based here at this time, because I've been around and lived other places. But in this moment, during this time, when we're talking about 2020, what is needed from me, by me, through me, to be able to express the significance of me being who I am from the Roundel neighborhood with an opportunity to dissolve the walls at the Walker Arts Center.
Yeah. Well, you know, we came away and reflecting on the project with a tremendous amount of gratitude to you. I mean, I think trust was an important, the way you talked about trust that you, with your collaborators and their trust in you to lead them. And I hope there weren't moments when we would ask, well, what is really going to happen? Or what could you, and like you said, you needed the space to be able to be tuned into what is needed, you know, as the project developed.
Yes.
And it taught us, even though we like to say a lot, we trust in the artists and we follow their lead. But here, we really did need to trust you, and you came through so beautifully.
Didn't give you much choice at one point. But thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
you know?
Because it is, you know, that's what institutions should be doing. If they make a commitment to an artist, it has to be based on a huge amount of trust in them and allowing them to do the work that they feel are most pressed to do. But,
and I was committed.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Was so committed to the. It might sound like I was under a tremendous amount of pressure, and I was at certain points of the work.
Well, at some point you had 15, 20, 25, 30 people all looking to you for what do we do next, or like what the answers were.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah, right.
At the same time, there was a vision that was so clear to me.
Right.
I know I said that it had to develop, but taking the time to be present so that the vision can come to me. When it did, it was so clear on how to get to the next steps. The journey was just also being able to communicate that to the collaborators and the institutions of what that is, which they haven't seen.
Yeah.
So then that also challenged me in developing my ability to communicate and to articulate in many different ways that I wasn't always accustomed to, which required a whole nother level of commitment of seeing it through.
Yeah, right. And in many ways, you're in the middle or maybe at the early stage of the whole initiative. Coming the fall, you'll go to New York with a version of the work to
Yeah.
Dance Space. We all hope it'll have a future life going on beyond that. How are you feeling about the future of the work? And,
I mean, I'm in that space almost like it's being
yeah.
reborn again.
Yeah.
You know, so
Right. It's a very different kind of space and city in some
and
ways.
city
Yeah.
and different relationships. And actually, Dance Space at St. Mark's Church is Lori Carlos's hometown.
Yeah, right. That's
Which
right.
is, I didn't plan that necessarily in terms of the way that my relationship with Dance Space has been built.
Right.
But it's certainly appropriate, and I do recognize it, and I do name it.
Right.
But it's just another process of taking the time to reflect on what happened here,
Yeah.
to think about mentorship and with Lori Carlos, and to think about what it means to be on the Lower East Side, and just continue this process that has evolved over a number of years with Dance Space in mind over the number of years, and how that is taking the work and expanding it beyond the Twin Cities,
Right.
to bring another model or way of thinking about how this methodology that has now become a model for me in my work and in my process that I would love to be able to share more widely.
Right.
Dance Space Project and touring this work to New York at this stage gives an opportunity to expand it and see how it moves in different spaces outside of the Twin Cities, and
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that.
I'm thrilled that you will have a different and another life with the work,
Yeah.
with a very important dance center in New York, and
Yeah.
partners in the past with some other projects here at the Walker. But
Yeah.
any last thoughts about your time here or the project? I don't know if I was going to ask you, but this is maybe unfair, but I was just curious if in the 3-year process, if there's a moment where it was particularly felt ecstatic and full of joy and expansive, and it was like, this is what I hoped it would be, and a second moment where it just seemed dark and like you couldn't find your way, or there were just so many challenges.
Oh,
And
yeah.
are there moments that come
Oh,
back to you?
yeah. Multiple.
Yeah.
I remember saying, I've burnt out and come back to life more than once in this project because of just the being in the moment, you know,
Right.
and it being something that was being realized in real time,
Right.
and still will continue to be, because that's the model that CTR has created,
Right.
and the methodology of it.
Yeah.
So like now I'm ready for that a little bit more than I was
Right.
first starting out.
Yeah. Do you feel you're a different person now than 3 years ago?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, we all are, but in terms of this project requiring you to grow in new kinds of ways.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I definitely have seen my capacity expand and
Right.
change.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how much I can hold.
Yeah, right.
And some may think that's a bad thing. Some may think that's a good thing. I can't control what other people think or how they think about it. But for me,
I can't imagine it as a bad thing. But
no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing. And
Right.
now with being in a position where I can look back, it has to know that I could deepen my capacity and my well for more connection within the spiritual realm and with people and with humanity, and my compassion is something that is so joyous and so beautiful to experience that I want to share that with as many people as I possibly can.
That's fantastic. I won't ask you about the dark moments, but
I mean,
because it was a complex multi-year
there were
project.
scary moments.
Yeah, but I think you always found your way really valiantly, you know, through, and you had changes in collaborators and changes in dance artists and, you know, shifts in project. We had the pandemic. We had.
I mean, there is adversity, and I'm not gonna just skip over adversity.
Yeah,
I think it's
no.
important
Right.
that we talk about that. And I also think that I have, over my life, through my lived experience, because my growing up here has not been romantic. It's not romantic.
Right.
Growing up in the Rondo community.
Yeah.
But there are aspects of it that when you're going through so much tumultuous struggle within a community, that there are people that help to hold you down and keep you stabilized on some levels, and I've experienced in my life where my entire stability has been wiped completely away from me, and then having to figure out how to regain my stability again. And I've been through those experiences since a very young child. And so I've learned from a very young child, what does it mean to be in a space where you can't see the other end, or there is no light through that tunnel.
Right.
And then go through it at a young age where I did have my parents, so to speak, around me to some degree to keep me somewhat stabilized, because I am fortunate to have a roof over my head. I am fortunate to be able to have a meal every day in my life. I was fortunate to be able to find someone to give me a hug. That was genuine love.
Yeah.
So with me in my life having experiences along those lines, I eventually got to see on the other side that there is another side.
Right.
You can get through, and you staying focused. Once you get through and you get to the other side, there's another experience, and everything that you went through it was necessary to experience the other side in a new way. So what I learned from a young child is how to take experiences that are painful and that are hurtful, and I will be so bold to say even traumatic, is that there is still and this is where the divine tuning also comes in, that there is still a force of nature that we can tune into within what we call natural, not naturalized, but what we call that is natural, that gives us the stability that may not always feel stable in the moment, because it's expanding your capacity.
Right.
So if your capacity is being expanded, it feels like you're losing yourself.
Yes, right.
But when you're tuning into this natural force, not naturalized, but this natural force that you're able to tune into, which happens when everything that you think you know is no longer what you know anymore,
Right. Yeah.
is when you have the space to tune into this kind of force.
Yeah.
And then you feel yourself expand when you get to the other side, and you've also experienced that expansion through the adversity.
So it's more than resilience. It's like expanded capacity.
Expanded capacity.
Yeah.
It's about the unknown being a space for possibility.
And from an artist's point of view, the unknown is an expansive, creative place.
Generative.
Generative. Yeah.
Because it's a place to set intention.
Yeah.
It's a place to ask questions.
Right.
It's a place to learn how to ask questions because you don't know.
Right.
It's a space to be vulnerable, to get to know aspects of yourself that you didn't know before. It's an opportunity to potentially fumble over words to experience another way of articulating and expressing yourself. And it's an opportunity to be embodied in a way that could potentially bring about more love. And this, sometimes I say, did I learn this how my parents raised me? Or is this just, where did this come from? Like my perspective and how to think about thriving through processes of survival, or just thriving because you have an innate and natural sensibility that says you are that. You might lose it.
Right.
You might get confused.
Yeah.
But you are that. You are that because you are, because we are, because you are. I am, and we are that. You know. So like, I will give you one example, and say that the first cohort of Call to Remember, I became so attached to.
Yeah. In that very first version at Pillsbury House, Amara and
Yes.
VBOM and
I was so attached to the way that we came into a room and studied and learned and became in a process of trust with each other, even though it was a short time.
Right.
But through improvisation, we trusted, we got to know each other a little bit better, especially the parts we didn't know.
Right.
Like we accepted the unknown to be in space together and to generate this through possibility and through intention, by also referencing our histories as a place of a reference point to question. And I became so attached and so in love. And I'm still in love, but I'm not attached.
Right.
And so there was a process of detachment that happened because of the pandemics, we were in a space of flux. Like,
Right.
people had to reconstitute their priorities
Yeah.
in order to survive. Like, there's no getting on a plane right now.
Right.
Like, for some
Yeah.
people, I'm not
Right.
flying.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I'm just not. Like, people were changing,
Right.
right? And so then there was a part of me that to learn about my attachment to a particular relationship
Right.
and outcome
Right.
for CTR. And through them saying, we support you, we love you, but we cannot continue.
Right.
Then I was like, but how does this work continue without you all?
Yeah.
Because I'm attached to this being with you.
Right.
And then it was a moment where I felt in complete dark space, complete possibility, but I didn't know it was possibility. I just was like, I don't know how to see a way right now. And what came to me was that, but this work must continue. The work has to continue. And so now I surrender to the work continuing.
And when we look, that was, 2.5 years ago, that dark moment. When we look at what you accomplished, what the love and the inspiration you gave to hundreds of people here, both those that work at the Walker, but all the audience members who turned out for it. Really, I am so grateful, as many people are, that you didn't give up at that moment, and that you knew when we would ask you, we didn't pry too much, but how are you doing, or do we have a future here? And you said yes, we do, and you figured it out, and I'm glad that you did. So I think that might be a good place to end, but I just want to say thank you for giving us this gift of Call to Remember and of the project you did here, and we look forward to staying in close touch going ahead into the future.
Me too.
Yeah. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.